Can you remember the first time that you read a Tintin book?
Yes, vividly.
Tell me about it, please.
Well, I was 4 years old and I just had my supper at home, and I remember sitting down with my mother at the dining table and reading it. I remember the very first page, it was The Shooting Star, which is this marvelous opening page where there's this terrible tension and feeling of foreboding. The world is coming to an end. This meteorite is hurtling towards the earth, and you feel the heat almost rise from the pages, and it's so evocative. And I was completely mesmerized by it as a 4-year-old.
Love at first sight.
It was. And I mean, I was just captivated by it. And then, like all young Tintin readers, and all Tintin readers of any age, once you've read one Tintin, you then want to read another and another. And luckily, we have 23 completed Tintins to read, adventures to read.
We know very little about Tintin's private life, really.
Yes.
How come we love him so much, although we know nothing about him, really?
I think that's why we love him so much, because he's wonderfully anonymous. We know so little about him, hardly anything about him. We know quite a lot about all his friends, the characters around him. We know much more about them than him. But the wonderful thing is that he's a blank space to be filled in. And of course, this is what the reader does, particularly the young reader. He will identify with Tintin, and he's able to project himself, the reader, into Tintin's shoes. And I think that's so wonderful because it was intended for young Belgians in 1929 when it first came out. And now, today, you will go to India and you will find a young Indian boy, or to China or to Japan, and Tintin means the same to them. And it's possible, it's wonderfully multicultural because of this blankness. So an Indian boy can step into Tintin's shoes as easily as a Swedish boy.
So you still discover new details, although you read these books hundreds and maybe thousands of times.
I'd love to know how many times I've read each of the books, but I go on reading them. I go on discovering things, and one of the most wonderful things is that I discover things from other readers, and from when I give talks, like I've just given a talk here today, the audience, every reader has something to contribute. Everybody sees something in Tintin, and I can learn from them. The new book I've just written, Tintin & Co., was inspired by questions which children ask me about the characters. I'd just done a bigger book on Tintin about the adventures and so on, and when I would talk to children and to audiences about that, I asked them for questions, and the questions would always be about the characters. Why was Captain Haddock like that? What inspired Captain Haddock? Who was Professor Calculus? Why Milou? And all these questions came, and I had to answer them. So I thought, why not do a book which looks at, say, a dozen characters, the main characters, and a few others, and look at what actually lies behind these marvelous characters.
Do you feel worried or excited about the Steven Spielberg project coming up?
I think it's very exciting. I hope that everything comes off. Why it's so exciting is that there's a remarkable story about Hergé. Despite his love of the cinema, he only bought a television of his own for the first time in 1969. One of the first films he saw on television, one of those which really impressed him, was a film called Duel, which was an early Spielberg film. And he was completely riveted by it. And he thought, this young American is quite something. But the amazing thing is that about 2 or 3 months before he died, and this is something I discovered recently in Brussels when I was working on a biography of Hergé, Hergé said, if there's one person who can film Tintin, it's this American Spielberg. And he said this after various Belgians and French people had tried unsuccessfully to film Tintin. But 3 months before he died, he said the one person who can bring Tintin to the screen is Spielberg. And I think that's amazing that he said that at the end of 1982. And here we are in 2008, and we hope that in a year or so we'll be seeing a Spielberg film of Tintin. I think that's amazing. Amazingly appropriate.
Which one is your favorite Tintin book?
That's an impossible question, because they are all marvelous in their own ways. If you love Mozart and you are asked which is your favorite Mozart opera, how do you answer that? It's a question of mood. One day I like King Ottokar's Scepter is my favorite. Another day the Blue Lotus is. It will change.